Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Where Did QA Go? The Role of QA in a Scaled Agile Environment. I'm Sarah Taylor, and today I will be your webinar host. We are delighted to bring this webinar to you in partnership with our guest panelists, AccuWeather. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. Today's webinar will last approximately 40 minutes, with 15 minutes at the end for your questions. You'll have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters and panelists by typing them into the questions pane chat box of the control panel. The control panel is situated on the right-hand side of your screen. You can send these questions in at any time. We will collect your questions and address these during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. A reminder that a recording of this webinar will follow within 24 hours. So without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce you now to today's presenters and our panel. From Qualitest, Yoav Siv, COO West, and Hardik Parekh, AVP of Delivery. And from AccuWeather, Doug Honickle, VP Engineering, Kurt Philipp, Global Chief Product Officer, and Maggie Takash, Director of Operations. So over to you, Yoav.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me. Unfortunately, my accent is not going to be perfect as Sarah's, but I hope that we can overcome that by having a meaningful conversation. I especially want to thank Maggie, Doug, and Kurt from AccuWeather, who have agreed to join us in this webinar and really share from their business and technical experience on the topic that we are talking about today. Before we start, I just want to give kind of a high-level agenda about this discussion. So we are actually going to discuss maybe 2 or 3 topics today. The first one is going to talk about the agile transformation and what is the challenge that we see in the market. What are the dilemmas that QA leaders or quality engineering leaders are experiencing when they're doing this transformation and what to be aware of. And then we're going to talk about, what is our point of view, how does it come together in AccuWeather, what are the things that we should note, and maybe have a conversation about what are some of the things that we would recommend when doing this transformation. This by no means a detailed agile webinar. It's more focused on kind of the high-level concepts of QA in that. And then after we do that, we're going to have some Q&A session, and hopefully we can cover some of your questions. Just before we start, one kind of more comment: who we are, Qualitest. I would assume many of you who registered to this webinar had an opportunity to get exposed to who we are, but we are the world's #1 pure play quality assurance company, which means that we are a company of roughly 4,000 people doing only quality engineering, and especially focusing around advanced methodologies, automation, innovation, AI, and the likes, the things that actually move quality engineering forward. And I would be happy, Kurt, if you could give just a couple of words on AccuWeather. I know everyone from the US knows AccuWeather, but just in case, if you can just describe quickly what AccuWeather is, what do you do?
Absolutely, and hi everybody. Apologies that you can't see me on camera today, but I'm certainly here in full audio. Kurt Philipp, Global Chief Product Officer for AccuWeather, and for those of you who don't know who we are a global weather company that is used by 1.5 billion consumers every month, powering everything from mobile apps, websites, connected devices, and we have a full range of products that both support consumers and businesses. You may know us from our AccuWeather app or AccuWeather.com, and also across a wide device of smartphones and ecosystems, particularly in the Android world. So a global weather company based in the US, but certainly servicing hundreds of other markets as well.
Excellent. All right, great. Okay, so let's jump right into the first topic of the conversation, which I call, where did QA go? and I think it might be a little bit of an enigmatic title, but I hope that by the end of this chapter you will understand why I chose that. So when we're trying to understand what is happening in the world of quality engineering as you and your organization transform into agile, we need to step back and remember how does quality look like in waterfall, right? Because this is the starting point of a lot of the journeys. And I'm sure that this is not going to be a surprise to many of you on the call, on the webinar, that there is like a development time frame where the functionality that is being developed is being tested by the development team. And then from there is a predefined structured period where pretty much most of the testing is being done. And this is what we call the testing period, right? And typically, you know, the functional testing, the non-functional testing, the regression testing, creation of automation, the end-to-end, the SIT, the system integration testing, all of that done in that testing period. And it's typically done, or used to be done in pure waterfall companies by what used to be called the testing center of excellence, right? So there was a separate group that did testing, and there was a handoff between development and testing, right? And then sometimes there was some kind of a thin layer of business testing, or whether it's user testing or whether insurance testing, and maybe some other types of testing, and then go live, right? And this fit quite well the world of, you know, relatively slower releases, relatively large releases, very complex and integrated architectures. Now, if we look at this testing center of excellence, over the years, it, you know, because of its kind of separate function, it had certain roles that were performed, you know, hopefully pretty well. One is to test. I'm going from the bottom up. One was to test, which is really, after development finished, doing basically certifying everything that is being done from a functional perspective. The second reason those TCOEs existed was that they provided economy of scale, right? So there are fluctuations in demands and fluctuations in activities between the different teams and between the different applications. And so you needed to be able to shift around resources between those applications, especially when it comes to non-functional testing, right? You don't need usability testing 100% of the time for each application. You don't need performance testing 100% of the time for each application. So by having this as a central team, it created some economy of scale. The other thing that the TCOE was responsible for was the end-to-end testing, right? So while the unit testing was being done, you know, by each and every application, the system integration testing and end-to-end testing could only be done by, you know, looking at cross-application view. And this was definitely something that only the TCOE could have done. And then lastly, but very importantly, because the TCOEs were the custodian of quality in the company. They were the people who kind of said, okay, this is how we do testing, and this is how we are, and they were tasked to do it more effectively, faster, and cheaper. They continuously created, in, you know, where it worked well, they continuously created the improvements in terms of standardization, test strategy, test reporting, capability assessments, tooling, automation. They were responsible to inject all that into their testing team. So by and large, you could say that the testing center of excellence was the custodian of quality. If the CEO or the CIO needed to know, can I go to production? Are we good? Then you would expect the testing center of excellence people to say yes or no. Now, let's do a quick, very quick run-through of what is actually happening in Agile. So when you transform into Agile, what you want to do is you want to shift left a lot of the activities that used to be part of the testing period into your sprint, right? So you take as much as you can from the functional testing and you put it into the sprint. You try to automate as much as possible as you progress, right? As you test the functionality, you try to automate it so that you can contribute to an ever-growing end-to-end suite. Some of the non-functional testing can be done inside the sprint, right? And I think many of you know that, but at the end of the day, this is kind of what we see, right? So what we want to be able to do in agile testing is to shift left as much as possible into the sprint and have the sprint not only test the functionality, but also create the automation that will allow us, after the sprint ends, to run a very effective automated end-to-end and go live. Now, this is great. Unfortunately, there has been a lot of confusion in the industry of how do we achieve that. In effect, the problem that was created was that this one centralized custodian of quality was federated now into different sprints. And so, obviously, for development teams and companies, this is a relatively comfortable situation, right? They say, okay, so we are going to do the QA in the sprint. And this created a trend in some cases in the market, which actually said, oh, you know what, there is no need for a quality professional organization in the company. It's just going to slow us down. Let's have the developers do everything, the development and the QA, and it will be the most effective thing, right? They sit together, they know the software, let's just do it. And so this actually created a dilemma to technology and business leaders. And the dilemma is the following. On one hand, it does make sense that if the development and QA people, actually not even QA people, if the developers can actually do development and QA, I mean, that's great, right? They are, you know, why would you need and maybe we can even let go of QA and save some money. On the other hand, what we have seen in the market as this kind of started to evolve is that when this happens, some basic functionalities of the testing world are becoming more problematic. Right? So the first one is the most obvious one. If the developers are doing the testing, then who is kind of making sure that they did a good job, number one. Number two, a developer is a developer. Right? They know how to test their own functionality. But who is looking at the business aspects of who is making sure that whatever you test is not only fit for specs, but it's actually fit for use? So that was one challenge. And maybe even the bigger challenge is like, who is doing all of that? Who is doing everything else? If now all the testing is inside the sprint, who is working on economy of scale for testing? Who is making sure that end-to-end testing is done properly? Who is making sure that we are not testing twice, there are duplications or gaps in testing? And then who is continuously working on making sure we know where we are, we know the KPIs, we know, if the software is in good quality, who is working on those innovations, et cetera, et cetera. And so we call that where did QA go? Because as this transition started to happen, some organizations actually were tempted to go into this, okay, development will do everything, and completely federated the QA, and then they kind of woke up and say, okay, so who's doing that? And this is where we see kind of a challenge in the industry today. And so if you are facing this challenge, or you are about, or you are in the journey, this is probably where this webinar might be reasonably interesting to you, because we are going to try to provide a point of view of how this actually should be done better. Because at the end of the day, when QA kind of gone, well, what we see in the market is that two major phenomena happen. One is that the quality is actually being reduced. And QA has always been there for a reason, and the reason is that it's a profession, right? You need to know how to test not only the specs of the software, but also the business intention, the things that the tester would know how to do, like negative testing and other things. And what we find is that the business owner confidence is actually going down. And the other thing is that unlike this initial assumption is that, okay, I will let all QA go and it will just cost less, actually what we see is that the cost is going up, right? Because there are less shared resources across the towers, there is lower utilization of the infrastructure like environment and test data. There are duplications in test execution, right? Because there is no one who is kind of looking at it across the sprints. There is less reuse between the automation that is being done in the sprint, if it is done, to the end-to-end suite, or what we call progression testing. And there are much less standards and end-to-end kind of visibility to management, which sometimes it just costs more, and sometimes it actually creates a pretty big issue in production. So at this point, I want to stop for a second once we kind of introduce the dilemma or the problem, and I want to turn to our guests, and I want to start with Kurt. And Kurt, one of the things that we hear from customers who made the move to distributed development and QA environment without a structured QA team is that the business owners and the IT executives kind of have less confidence in the product. What is the importance in your mind as a business executive? What is the importance that you see in the confidence in the relationship with your technology team? And how have you been able to maintain that in AccuWeather?
Absolutely, and I think it's a great example of both Doug and I, who's my partner on the other side of the fence, in the confidence and the relationship that we have between business and product. And if I can answer that by illustrating sort of a case in point of our newly launched mobile app. If you haven't had the chance, iOS and Android, please jump on in and download the new AccuWeather app. But I mentioned that on the basis that our product serves tens of millions of users on a monthly basis. We relaunched this product. It's a dramatically different experience from what we offered today. And collectively, when product design and our development team have been working on this for the last 12 months, the confidence and relationship that we have with our technology partners, as well as our QA team, is utmost critical for at least me to be able to feel confident that when I give the green light to go, we're making the right decision for both our users, but also business impact. And building that trust. And I think trust is the key word, through transparency in the process, articulating facts and situations, whether that be good or bad, onto the product and business leader is utmost key, as well as the openness and transparency in the dialogue. Because the reverse, if there's no trust and lack of confidence, the relationship becomes unworkable. And I'm very proud to say that in our example, and that sort of use case shows how product and technology are equal partners. Product happen to be the people who push the green light or the go, no-go decisions, but lacking any confidence would ultimately undermine my ability to make a decision. And fortunately, particularly in app development, which has significant difficulties in rolling back, we've been able to build that relationship on staying in lockstep, staying very transparent with each other, and having the difficult conversations early if we've ever needed to do that.
Thank you very much. And now, so naturally, the next question to you, Doug, is you are the technology leader. It's up to you guys to be able to build this trust with Kurt and his team. So I assume that at some point of time you also had this dilemma, should I have QA people involved or not involved? What would be your advice to other technology leaders when facing this dilemma, and how did this help you in your kind of trust building with your business customers?
Yeah, I think for me it's critical first and foremost really to use data to not only show the value of QA or shared services for a particular effort, but also show what QA or shared services are going to spend time on. I've seen many times in my career where QA goes into an effort and says, well, we need a full regression test. I don't think in the world of mobile devices and real-time information, really in a time where the industry will just pass you by if you don't get features and functionality out the door, that you can go into efforts anymore and say, well, I need a full regression test time and time again. So I think it's critical to pinpoint test coverage that's required for an effort, communicate risks, use data to help communicate those risks, and ultimately take advantage of automation and continuous integration and things like that to deliver results quickly. For AccuWeather and our relationship and partnership with Qualitest, it's been critical to take advantage of some of the tools that you guys have brought to the table, like reusable automation frameworks that span data, APIs, web and mobile apps, tools like QualiView to give us real-time insight into status and data across the lifecycle, and then of course QualiSense that really lets us pinpoint where are the risky areas using historical data that we need to focus on for these efforts. And for me, that's the most critical part. And sometimes that data shows us, well, we really don't need testing. And we can communicate that as well. And I know our partnership with Kurt and the product and design team, we have those conversations regularly and openly, and it's a good collaborative relationship.
Excellent. I think, knowing the AccuWeather operation, I really think that this is really, one of the great examples of how development and QA and business kind of all work in concert to do the most effective thing, utilizing testing technology and testing knowledge, but also just pure common sense and good collaboration. So it's great to hear. I want to move on. So I think that by now, hopefully, kind of the main dilemma or the main challenge that people are, they need to handle conceptually as a strategy before they start or as they do their agile transformation is really how should I do QA, right? So the first question is, should we just let go of QA and do it without any quality involvement? And I hope that we established already, at least on a high level, that that's probably not what we think is a good idea. So what is the kind of high level direction that we should, that we should make sure is happening? And I wanted this, and I think that the main message, if there is one thing that if there is one slide that would summarize my point of view and Qualitas' point of view on that, is that what we need to be careful is that while QA or quality engineering has to change in Agile, and we'll talk a little bit about how, but it has to change, obviously. But it cannot change the essence of quality engineering, and it cannot lose the knowledge of quality engineering that you have built over time. Right? Quality still needs to be independent and intentional. It cannot be just a byproduct of something else that is being done. It can be, but then it doesn't work. Right? It has to make, you guys have to make sure that your quality in whatever change you do for Agile is still fit for use and not only fit for specs. Right? Meaning that the business owners needs to know that when you say done is done, you don't only do the unit testing, or you don't only do the, the kind of JUnit level testing, or you don't even if you did some additional testing, you're not looking at it only from a functionality perspective, but from a user behavior perspective. Testing must look at cross-tower or cross-application quality, right? Not only from an integration perspective, but also from the end-to-end user flow. And quality needs to be done effectively. You cannot assume that it will just be effective. You have to manage the standards, the tools, the shared resources. All of that has not changed. And then the other thing is that you need to make sure, as you've done in the waterfall world, that you are reusing and optimizing all the time across the testing levels, right? From your in-sprint testing to the integration testing to the end-to-end testing, you have to be able to do it as effectively and as reusable as possible. So how do you do that, right? How do you drive those concepts into an agile environment? In a waterfall environment, you had a testing center of excellence. How do you do that in an agile environment? So by and large, I think you can divide the world of testing in scaled agile. And when I say scaled agile, is typically I'm talking about applications that are integrated with one another. Typically you have some front end, some back end, the front end can be a mobile app, then you have some backend systems, right? It's typically a relatively integrated environment. So when you have that, how do you do the scaled agile quality inside that? So the first area we're going to talk about is the in-sprint testing. And in the in-sprint testing, again, some folks will assume that all you need to do is to get the developer to test. Our point of view, and actually it's not only our point of view, it's also SAFe. If you know what SAFe is the Scale Agile framework that is by and large used as the standard for how to run scaled agile operation, right? So if you look at there, you definitely see a role for a testing professional inside the sprint. And what this testing professional needs to do are a few key things. First of all, they need to be integrated into the Scrum. And this is complicated, right? Because they are independent. They need to be independent. They need to voice the voice of the business owner of whatever they are developing. But they also are part of the team, right? So it's a Scrum team or a Kanban team, but they are part of it, but also they have an independent eye. So that's relatively complicated to do. The other thing is that they need to partner with the business from day one, right? They need to understand the intent behind the feature that they are working on. By the way, not only that, not going back just one step, not only that they need to understand it, they also need to verify that whatever the sprint is going to develop is actually testable. Sometimes it's not. And the tester, or sometimes the test architect, they need to say, yes, we are testing in something that is actually testable and deployable. So when the sprint is done, we can actually move it to the automated end-to-end and then to deployment. The other thing is that we need to separate between what we call the unit test or the TDD level testing, again, JUnit or similar activities, from the BDD, from the behavioral testing that is done by the tester. So a key role of the tester inside the sprint is to bring the behavioral testing aspect of the function. It's not only enough to say that the developer can pretty easily verify that the code is working per specs. The tester needs to bring that user behavior aspect of that and make sure that the software, even in the sprint, is fit for use and not only fit for spec. Now this creates a situation where you might ask, so what, the developers are not responsible for quality? Of course they are. But there are two problems with that. One, sometimes developers are moving, right? So this whole notion of, yes, you have one developer who's going to be here forever and is going to own the quality of what he developed, it just doesn't work in reality. But also, even if everyone is responsible for quality, you still need to be certified by a professional. Now, a very important thing to be done in the sprint is to automate as we go. Right? Many times what we see is that the sprint is ending and things are going to production, and then we go and automate. What we wanted, and then you have another sprint and you need to maintain it again, and another sprint and you need to maintain it again. If we, as much as possible, it's not always 100% possible, but as much as possible, the automation needs to happen in the sprint. So that when a sprint is done, actually you have two artifacts. One is the code that changed, and the other one is the automated code that changed. And if you do that right, over time, you build your regression testing as a byproduct of your in-sprint testing. And lastly, as much as possible, non-functional requirements or non-functional testing needs to be pulled into the sprint. Now, it's not always possible. For example, sometimes you must do large-scale performance testing, but in many things it is possible. In performance, there are ways to handle a lot of the requirements in the sprint. Things like usability and accessibility can be handled in the sprint. So as much as possible, if you could do that in the sprint, it saves time. It means that when you do all of that together, you're done with the sprint, you're actually done. Right? And then all you need to do is you need to run your end-to-end and go to production. And if your end-to-end is automatic because you've been automating in the sprint for quite some time, then you're in a really advanced stage to do continuous testing. So And again, one of the things that I encourage you to do is to go to SAFE. I'll provide the links in the end of this deck. Go to, if people are telling you only developers need to be in the sprint and this is the only thing that needs to be done, go to SAFE and you will see there a very specific definition of what the developers need to do and what the testers, with the help of the developers, need to do. So now it's time for me to go back to our guest. And Doug, I wanted to ask you a question. You know, many times people say that it's hard for the QA folks to collaborate with the developers in the sprint or in the Scrum teams. What is your experience there? Do you feel that you know, quality engineering professionals, it's hard for them to be part of the Scrum? Is it effective? Is it helping?
Yeah, I think it really starts with how do you engage them into the process and when do you? I think it certainly is much harder the later in the life cycle that you engage them. If you wait until requirements are written and designs are done, it becomes difficult. I think a lot of questions are raised all at once in a quick manner, and it's difficult to react to those. So for us, it's been critical in partnership with Kurt's team, the product and design teams, to engage the quality engineers, not only on day one, but we've had them even engage in project kickoffs. You know, like Kurt talked about earlier, we had a recent major launch of our Android and iOS mobile apps, which Qualitest was a key partner to help us accomplish that. And last year, around the same time, we launched a rewrite of our AccuWeather.com platform. And in both scenarios, we engaged the quality engineers in the off-site project kickoffs to hear from the very first moment, here's what we're doing, here's what's happening. And right then, they started engaging in the conversation. They started asking questions. They started asking NFR, non-functional requirement questions that nobody even had, you know, 5 minutes to think about at that point. So for me, I think that's the most critical thing, and that ultimately builds trust very quickly, and it builds a very collaborative relationship where, you know, I see it today. I think all teams, product managers, designers, quality engineers, developers are having open Slack discussions. Sure, sometimes they get tense, but at the end of the day, you know, there's a virtual high five and you know, they're on to the next topic, having great conversation.
Yeah, and I'm sure that it really has to do with the spirit that you guys are, you know, are kind of injecting into the team. Is it a spirit of collaboration or is it a spirit of finger pointing, right?
Right, absolutely. I mean, we're here to deliver a world-class, industry-leading, you know, weather app, and we've done that very successfully. And I think setting that team, you know, that teamwork and that collaboration up front is critical. Anytime you pull a team in at the last minute, it's going to be difficult for them to adapt, get to know folks, and just setting that from the beginning is important.
Right. Thank you. And so I also want to ask Hardik, you know, you are a professional QA executive. You've done this in the past. It seems to me like a difficult task to embed independent testers into the, you know, many of them are juniors, right, into such an environment where you have, you know, the developer, you have the Scrum Master, you have the business owner, you have, right, how do you do that, right? What are the key things that you need to make sure that your QA people in the sprint, you know? How do you make them ready for this environment?
Yeah, I think it's important to set them up for success ultimately. If we, you know, work closely with Qualitest and bring a bunch of junior quality engineers into a situation where we're rewriting AccuWeather.com or our mobile apps and they're the sole, you know, responsibility for it, it's going to be a tough situation for everybody. But I think if we can work with our partners and work with our internal quality engineers and make sure that each effort is staffed appropriately with a quality architect, you know, a key lead, some vocal folks, some folks that are great at execution and automation, and build that team, even if it's a team of 3, you can have one senior quality engineer and two junior level. I think that's a great team, and then certainly as it gets bigger, it gets a little bit easier. But ultimately, understanding the initiative, understanding how the team needs to be built and who they're working with, and work on that with our partners, I think sets it up for success from the beginning. Again, if we're in a rush and we need, a week to staff a project because we set a date for it and, 3 weeks out, that's going to be a tough situation. But planning ahead, coordination from the beginning across all teams, again, Kurt and myself are in touch regularly. And also to add, we have a great collaboration partnership with Qualitest at all levels. It's not just an individual contributor thing through the Scrum teams. It's really from the top with the Qualitest leadership and Kurt, the Qualitest leadership and myself, and Kurt and myself together. Very open communication.
All right, thank you. Howdik, I have a question to you as how do you handle that? What do you prepare how do you prepare the team when you inject Qualitest people into the AccuWeather teams as Scrum teams?
Sure, you are.
How do you deal with this, dual role that they have?
Yep, absolutely. So here at Qualitest, we have a change in mindset. So we don't think of a tester, we rather call them a dedicated quality advocate. And anytime we inject a quality engineer, rather it be a entry-level frontline engineer or a senior test lead, the goal is always to be a quality enabler into the team and focus on the product, focus on the quality of the product. And we have a variety of guide rails, if I may, in terms of coaching and mentoring the team and making sure that these folks who are coming from QE background, a quality engineering background, a classic testing background, they by default know what to look for, what to watch out, and how to effectively catch the issues. So the areas that we focus on, it's not primarily or mostly around testing, but we enable them in terms of how to work in a collaborative environment, right? As Doug and Kurt rightly said. So having a team working agreement, for example, like together as a team, what are the things we need to keep in mind to enable everyone have an open and transparent communication, right? We also have an agile playbook that we have implemented at AccuWeather, which works out really well. So anytime you add a new member in, they understand exactly who the stakeholders are, what is it that is expected from them in a sprint or in sprint and after every time there is a release. So a typical, daily Scrum checklist, not just a daily stand-up, but we coach them on, okay, these are the things you need to keep in mind when you are participating in a Scrum call, right? The testers need to speak up, be actively involved, as Doug rightly said. So even when we had an offsite meeting, our testers would start getting engaged from that point onwards and start thinking about how they can help the team discuss on testing various features, right? How to design the code for testability and operability, and helping each and every team member understand some basic testing skills. So the focus is always on the customer end-to-end experience by validating the business processes, but that focus starts from sprint 0 day 1 and even before that during the offsite.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you so much. I think it's very important. Now, guys, so we talked about the in-sprint testing, and again, we can talk days about that, but in high level, I think you understand the point, right? You have testing professionals, automation professionals in the sprint, involved from day 1. They are doing the user view of the testing from the user perspective, and they're also creating the automation for the end-to-end. So, technically that should be enough, right? If everyone is doing that, then you should be done, right? But actually, the more we kind of, collect this experience, we see that this is not enough, right? There needs to be some kind of a cross-enterprise, cross-company, sometimes cross-project view of testing. And this has a few key layers, right? And I'm going to go with them quickly one by one. One is end-to-end testing. So actually, many people feel that if they just do the in-sprint testing and everyone is thinking about the big picture, that's enough. That's not enough, right? You need to have an end-to-end testing. And by the way, I encourage you again to go to SAFE. It's all there. That is that is kind of covering the overall user journey, right? The overall flow. It's not enough to do the testing in, and you will be amazed in how many places this is not done, both from a functional and non-functional perspective. And so you need to have a layer that is defining those, how will the end-to-end look like? Now, ideally, it's going to be all automated by the in-sprint team. But in order to achieve that, this end-to-end kind of architecture team needs to define to the in-sprint what is expected from them, right? It's like, welcome to AccuWeather. This is what we expect you to develop for the end-to-end when you do the in-sprint testing, right? So this is what is kind of injected from the kind of higher cross-sprint team. And then the in-sprint team actually produces those scripts, as I mentioned before, and then the end-to-end team is actually just verifying, running, making sure that things are happening. These are, by the way, relatively lean teams, right? The more we are able to do the work inside the sprint, these teams are going to be leaner and leaner. So that's layer number one. Layer number two, as I described before, is the shared service for economy of scale, right? Mostly around non-functional testing, like security, performance, crowd testing, UX-specific testing like usability and accessibility. And also managing the shared infrastructure, the test environment, the data management, working on interface virtualization or infrastructure as a code, right? Someone needs to do that, and you cannot expect the in-sprint testing to do that effectively because this is not their day job, right? So you need to have this layer of experts kind of pulled from, whatever QA course that you have into kind of a pool that you are able to implement just in time. And then the last thing, which is very, very important, is that quality is an ever-changing domain. So not only that you need to make sure that you have the right strategy, the right practices and tools and reporting, you need to be able to say to your, to the equivalent of your Doug or to your equivalent of your Kurt or maybe to the CEO, what is the status of the quality of the software? You also need to continuously inject innovation and new testing technology. So for example, Doug was talking about QualiSense, which is a tool Qualitest provides in order to apply machine learning into optimization of testing, what to test, when to test it, how to not over-test. This typically will not come from the in-sprint testing teams because they are busy testing. And so while this may seem like an additional layer, it actually drives the efficiency of everyone else in the organization. And it's extremely, extremely important. So overall, this is the right structure per our point of view for, for a scale agile testing team. Most of the team is in the sprint. They are doing their day-to-day functional testing, as much as non-functional testing that can be done in the sprint. Automation the end-to-end. They receive from this cross-sprint team the standards, the processes, the metrics, the tools. It's like, welcome to AccuWeather. This is how we test here, right? And in return, they do their testing, and then they provide back to the end-to-end team the actual test metrics, the actual test data, and the automation that they've created. So if you do that right, actually, I'm going to touch on for this slide in a little bit later. But before I go there, I did want to go back again to Doug and Kurt and ask you. So, we talked about your experience in the in-sprint testing. How do the cross-sprint testing activities happen in AccuWeather? I mean, are you first of all, are you where you want it to be, or do you think there is still some way to go? And also, do you find it effective to have something which is not only in the sprint itself?
Yeah, I think for me Kurt, you want to go ahead? All right, I'll take it. So for me, I think first and foremost, we're always learning, right? We're always adjusting. So I would say there are certainly areas where we want them to be, and there are other areas where we're continually adjusting. And I think it's important, even if you think things are great in one team today, that you don't lose sight of learning and getting feedback and applying some of that feedback to the processes and life cycles. Continuous improvement is kind of the key word there. In terms of the cross-sprint activities, there are a couple things that we really focus on. There's coordination through Scrum of Scrums with our Scrum Masters. Qualitest is a key piece of that for us on a regular cadence, so that our Scrum Masters across various teams communicate regularly, talk about what's coming up and what challenges the teams have, and they take some of those conversations back. Things like data, DevOps, all are participating in those discussions. Scrum Master collaboration with our product managers, they have regular connects as well. And then I know that on Kurt's side, the product managers have regular connects also. So that communication, collaboration keeps, the changes, the conversations flowing, and we are able to keep the lines of communication opens with the various teams in many ways through that. Also tools like Slack and Teams are a big help for us. Obviously that's real-time communication. And then lastly, I think it's important in terms of automation, just integrate again up front. Identify the tools, establish a reusable framework, integrate those with test management tools, project management tools, etc., so that you get metrics and analytics across the life cycle, and then ultimately treat automation like a software application. Quality engineers have access, developers have access, anybody can contribute. If 2 quality engineers that are focused on our automation are allocated to a specific app, they can contribute for that app, but then also others that might be focused to the framework or focused to APIs or somewhere else can also contribute, and they're all working off of one kind of application versus individual implementations of automation.
Absolutely. Hey, Hardik, I wanted to ask you one last question, again, as someone that is implementing this with many customers. It looks like an overhead, right? Sometimes this can look like an overhead when you see this picture. What are some of the things you want to show your IT management or your customer when you propose having this kind of coordination layer? How do you solve that concern that it may add cost?
Sure thing, Yoav. Yep, you're absolutely right. Yep, you're absolutely right. And I see that multiple times when I talk to the industry leaders, that the initial thought is to look at it and think of it as a cost center. But in reality, if you peel the layers, it's not. It's actually a profit center, right? A QMO or a cross-enterprise or a cross-sprint testing, it's a governance structure that ensures the quality standards across disparate teams. And in times like this, we have distributed teams working from various different locations, and it's utmost important that we have a standard quality across all the Scrum teams as well as within the organization. On top of that, as you rightly mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, that economies of scale, it matters, right? We cannot hire a security tester or a performance engineer for every sprint out, every Scrum team that we have there. And they cannot participate in every stand-up, and they cannot be part of every sprint. So we need to think smart here. And the question we need to ask ourselves, or the industry leaders need to ask themselves, is how much money are we willing to invest to avoid a security breach, right? Or to avoid a website downtime. And more importantly, a lot of the times, because the test data and the test environments are not in place, companies lose competitive edge. Because the agile teams are so involved into working on the test data identification or test environment setup, right? So organizations need to start thinking about this long term and calculate the loss of revenue, calculate the impact to the bottom line, and most importantly, the impact to the brand it would cause because of these breaches and this kind of unfortunate events. Now, when you compare this against the cost of the setup for a QMO, it's peanuts, right? I mean, we will realize that
I would say one other thing. Hardik, I would say one other thing. The damage to a bad quality reputation, I think, is very, very clear. What I have seen also is that without the QMO, testing will actually cost more, right? Because there is no one that is going to make sure that automation is happening correctly. No one is going to have shared resources. No one is going to invest in the testing technology and how can you optimize testing. It's just going to be something that runs, and therefore, beyond the obvious value of higher quality and return on investment through better positioning in the market, I think it's a QMO needs to have its own case that it actually saves money rather than spend money. It may cost money, but the overall spend of QA needs to actually go down. If it doesn't go down, then there is room for improvement. And if there is room for improvement, the QMO needs to come with more innovative tools, more innovative ideas, etc. So absolutely agree that quality performance will go up, but also the cost should go down if you have this level. And folks, in the interest of time, I just want to kind of wrap up things and say that when you do in Agile, and I'll then go to Q&A, when we do quality in a scaled Agile environment, remember again, you have to change your quality engineering practices, but not the essence, right? Intentional, independent, doesn't change, Agile or not Agile. And the fact that quality needs to ensure fit for use and not only fit for specs doesn't change, Agile or not Agile. The fact that you need to test cross-tower or cross-application quality doesn't change, Agile or not Agile. This actually may change a little bit in a fully microservice environment, but most environments are not full microservices. So it actually does require integration testing and end-to-end testing, and it doesn't change Agile or not Agile. And it needs to still be done effectively and in an ever-growing effectiveness of the team. So the methodology changes, the practice changes, you have in-sprint, you have QMO, you don't have one maybe testing phase, but these essence things do not change. And if you do that right, then you can actually not only not reduce quality and business confidence, you can actually increase business confidence, because Agile in essence gets everyone closer together, work closer together in shorter sprints. That actually increases the confidence of the business. And also, not only do you not lose efficiency and velocity, you can actually gain, right? Because if you do whatever we talked about now right, you have less problems in your end-to-end, you have less problem to deploy, you have less bugs that are found later, your shift left actually works, and then you can complete the sprint and relatively quickly go to production. So with that, I want to move to a couple of questions that we have from you guys. And I'm going to start actually with you, Hardik. What would be the recommendation for choosing test automation tools for this kind of environment, for a scale agile environment? Is it open source? Is it scriptless tools? What would you say to our audience on that question?
Sure, Yoav. So the approach we have always had, it's different customers that we work with, they are in a different stage in terms of their agile journey, and rather than having a cookie cutter approach here, we always try and work with the customer to meet them where they are in terms of their agile journey. So to give you an example of AccuWeather, open source tool worked out really well, and as Doug rightly said, we have a reusable automation framework already in place, in terms of Java, C# or whatever coding language the customer might use. So that would always be our first thought, to see if that works out well for the customer, because we want to save that additional cost of tooling licenses. But then when you talk about website testing, when you talk about cross-browser testing or cross-device testing, we typically partner with an enterprise solution to make sure that we are able to scale and do parallel testing for the customer. So it depends on where the customer is in terms of their agile journey. It also depends on the skill set of the team members. If a customer has a quality engineering team in place that they would want to leverage, who does not have an automation background, then scriptless testing might be a good fit. But otherwise, if we have dedicated automation engineers or all-rounders, we prefer to have an open source framework, because they work just fine. There are some great tools out there like Selenium and APM, which are widely used, especially for web and mobile automation. And then the same goes for continuous testing and DevOps features, where depending on the tool set that the customer is using, the reusable frameworks that we have at Qualitest as our IPs syncs and works really well, and it gives at least 6 to 8 weeks of head start to the customer, if not more, because of the flexibility that we bring along with these tools and the framework.
And Hardik, how about, on the QMO side, on kind of the governance and optimization? What do we typically use, and what would we recommend?
So in terms of tools and technologies?
Yes, in terms of the tools and technology, yeah.
Okay, so QualiView has been one of the tools that has worked out really well in terms of the reporting and governance. But what we have also done, Yoav, is we have a certain set of artifacts in place that the team can use in terms of crowd testing or performance testing. So QualiView is a centralized reporting structure where we can identify all the customer needs depending on the Scrum teams and have that single source of truth in terms of reporting, and then coupled that with artifacts that helps the team kickstart in terms of delivering value to these various Scrum teams.
Okay, excellent.
If I could jump into and just add one more
absolutely.
thing. If you're not sure, Qualitest will absolutely help you try and figure out what the right tool is for your business and your situation. I know early on when we started the partnership with Qualitest, we weren't sure what direction we wanted to head, both in test management tools and automation tools. And Hardik and the team went through a pretty thorough analysis of various options. We still go through that exercise at times with our mobile automation and performance tools recently. And Qualitest has absolutely been a key partner for us in selecting the right tools for our situation.
Awesome. I agree. I think Qualitest, it's part of what we do. I mean, each one of you guys in the audience can do whatever they want. Our philosophy is that when we invest in tools, it's great to use ours. Sometimes it's not, depending on the situation. And so we are tool agnostic, and if we can add value, great. If not, we're using we don't make it's not a big thing for us, the tools themselves, right? If they add value, great. If not, we're using whatever the customer what's best for that situation. Guys, we are almost out of time. I just want to say a few things and then let Sarah wrap up. It is not as easy as it sounds. Right, so you have to invest in your team in very structured training plans. So Hardik touched a little bit on that when we talked about the in-sprint testing, but there is quite a comprehensive kind of training and coaching processes that you need to develop in order to have your testers fit into this environment. And then the other thing is that when you launch a new agile project, you want to have the delivery artifact, the testing delivery artifact, almost like templated before you start, because otherwise it's going to be like inventing the wheel. When you come to your, to your teams, you want to bring them almost like a best practice of the training and the delivery artifacts, which you want to use. And the other thing, as I said before, I really encourage all of you to go and read in SAFe. In the methodology itself, I picked up some of the key quality articles out there, but it's fascinating, and it will also help you kind of give the arguments that no, quality is not going away in Agile. Actually, quality is very active. It needs to change, but it's very active. It's very important in Agile. It still needs to be independent. It still needs to be intentional. With that, folks, I wish to thank you and hope to see you soon. Sarah?
Thank you, Yoav. Many in our audience have commented how interesting today's session's been, so we're glad that everybody's found today's session useful. But sadly, our webinar has now concluded. So from there, I'd like to close by thanking our presenter, Yoav, and a special thanks to our panelists for sharing their expertise. Doug, Kurt, Maggie and Hardik, it's been a real pleasure. And finally, an extended thanks to our audience for joining us today. Until our next webinar, when we look forward to you all joining us again, all the best and goodbye.